The gravel crunched under the tires of Officer Ben Carter's patrol car as he slowed to a crawl, kicking up a plume of dust that hung in the dying light. Dusk was bleeding across the sky in hues of bruised purple and faded orange, casting long, skeletal shadows from the lonely sentinels of corn that lined the road. It was the end of a long shift, the kind that frayed the nerves and left a bitter taste of coffee and disappointment in his mouth. The call had been vague, a possible stray creating a hazard on Old Mill Road, and Ben expected to find a confused farm dog or, worse, the victim of a hit and run. He scanned the roadside, his eyes tired. For 10 years, he'd patrolled these rural routes, and the landscape of human carelessness had become achingly familiar. Discarded tires, bags of trash, forgotten furniture. But then he saw it, a slump of gold against the graying weeds. Unnaturally still, not a deer. Too small. He pulled over, the red and blue lights silently sweeping the empty fields. As he stepped out of the car, the evening air, thick with the smell of damp earth and distant rain, felt heavy. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on his utility belt more out of habit than necessity. It was a dog, a golden retriever, its coat matted with burrs and dirt. It was shivering, a tremor that ran through its entire body. But it wasn't the chill of the evening air. This was the shudder of pure terror. Ben knelt, his voice soft, the one he used for frightened children and spooked animals. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. I'm here to help." The dog didn't react. Didn't even lift its head. Its breath came in shallow, ragged puffs. And then Ben saw why. Tied tightly around the dog's head, covering its eyes completely, was a filthy strip of cloth. A blindfold. It was knotted so viciously that it must have been digging into the soft fur and skin. A surge of hot, raw anger shot through Ben, so potent it momentarily stole his breath. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a dog that had simply been let go. This was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. Someone had not only abandoned this beautiful animal, but had also stolen its sight, leaving it in a world of terrifying darkness on the edge of a lonely road. As he reached out a gentle hand to touch the dog's trembling back, he noticed something else. Something so incongruous it was jarring. A small, faded pink backpack, the kind a child would wear, was strapped securely over the animal's shoulders. The sight of it, a symbol of innocence and childhood, juxtaposed with the brutal blindfold, was a gut punch. Someone had packed a bag for this dog before leaving it to die. The mystery of it, the sheer coldness of it, settled deep in Ben's bones. This was no longer just a stray. This was a silent witness. And Ben Carter swore to himself, there in the fading light, that he would hear its story. The veterinary clinic was an oasis of sterile white light and quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the wild, untamed darkness where Ben had found the dog. Dr. Evans, a woman with kind eyes that had seen too much and a calm demeanor that could soothe the most frantic of pets, worked with gentle precision. Ben stood by, feeling large and useless in the small examination room, as she carefully snipped the threads of the filthy blindfold. "Easy now." "Sweet girl," Dr. Evans murmured, her voice a low hum. "Let's get this nasty thing off you." As the cloth fell away, the dog flinched, squeezing its eyes shut against the sudden brightness. Its pupils were dilated with fear beneath the blindfold. The skin was raw and inflamed. Dr. Evans let out a soft, pitying sigh, dehydrated, malnourished, and utterly terrified. She diagnosed, running her hands expertly over the dog's thin frame. "She's been through a terrible ordeal, but there are no immediate life-threatening injuries, with some fluids, food, and a lot of quiet kindness. She should be okay physically." The unspoken words hung in the air. Her mental scars would be another story. While Dr. Evans began administering an IV drip, Ben turned his attention to the object that felt like a lead weight in his hands, the small pink backpack. It felt sacrilegious to open it, like peering into a private world he had no right to see. Yet, he knew the answers he sought were likely zipped inside. He placed it on the stainless steel counter and pulled the zipper. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. It wasn't filled with rocks to weigh her down, or trash, or anything Ben's cynical cop brain had conjured. The contents were packed with a strange, heartbreaking tenderness. The first thing he saw was a small, plush teddy bear, its fur worn smooth in patches, one button eye dangling by a thread. It was clearly a cherished companion. Next to it lay a small, tarnished silver picture frame. Ben picked it up, his thumb wiping away a smudge on the glass. It was a photo of this very dog, sitting proudly in a sun-drenched garden. Her coat was a brilliant gold, her eyes bright and intelligent, a red ball held loosely in her mouth. Her arm was wrapped around an elderly woman with a cascade of white hair and a smile so warm and genuine it seemed to radiate from the photograph. They belonged together. The image was a portrait of pure, uncomplicated love. Ben's throat tightened. Whoever had abandoned this dog knew exactly what they were taking away. Beneath the photo was the final item. A small stack of envelopes, no thicker than his thumb, tied together with a simple, faded pink ribbon. They were addressed in a child's looping, unsteady cursive. The top one simply said, "For Daisy." Daisy, so she had a name, with trembling fingers. Ben untied the ribbon and carefully unfolded the first letter. The paper was creased and slightly damp, as if it had been held by a tearful hand. The pencil markings were faint but clear. He began to read the first line, and the words scrawled there broke through his professional composure and struck him squarely in the heart. "Dear Daisy, I'm so sorry." Ben didn't go home to sleep. The fluorescent lights of the precinct felt too harsh, too impersonal for the delicate, tragic story unfolding in his hands. Instead, he went back to his own quiet apartment. The silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of traffic. Under the focused glow of a single desk lamp, he carefully laid out the letters, arranging them by the subtle cues of a child's improving handwriting and the escalating drama in their contents. The first few letters were pure sunshine. They were filled with the simple, profound joys of a life shared between a girl, a woman, and a dog. "Dear Daisy," one began, adorned with a crudely drawn sun. "Today, Grandma Eleanor let me help her plant the petunias. You tried to help too by digging a hole right in the middle of them. Grandma said you were a silly girl and gave you a biscuit. I love our garden." Another read, "We played fetch for a whole hour. You never get tired. Grandma Eleanor sat on the porch swing and watched us, and her smile was the best part. She said we were her two favorite rays of sunshine." Ben read each one, a portrait of a loving, peaceful existence forming in his mind. He could almost smell the cookies baking, hear the laughter echoing in the garden. Daisy was not just a pet. She was the heart of this small, happy family. He glanced at the silver-framed photo on his desk, the image of the smiling woman and the happy dog. This was the world that had been shattered. Then, about halfway through the small stack, the weather of the letters began to turn. The sunny drawings were replaced by scribbled clouds. The joyful recounts of daily life gave way to confusion and a creeping sense of fear. "Dear Daisy, a man came to visit today. Grandma Eleanor called him her dark storm. I don't know his real name. He was very tall and didn't smile. When he left, I found Grandma crying by the window. She told me it was nothing, but her eyes were sad. The dark storm became a recurring character, soon identified as the Shadow Man. Lily's letters became a desperate chronicle of his visits. The Shadow Man came again. You growled at him when he walked in, and I was proud of you. He was talking to Grandma in a low, angry voice about the house, about money. She told him to leave. after he was gone. She hugged you so tight and whispered that you were her best protector. Ben felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the late hour. This was a child processing domestic conflict, translating adult fear and greed into the language of fairy tales and monsters. The Shadow Man wasn't a phantom. He was real. The final letter was the most chilling of all. It was short. The writing hurried and smeared. Dear Daisy, Grandma had a fall. The Shadow Man is here a lot now. He says he's taking care of her, but he won't let me see her for very long. He looks at you in a mean way. Please be careful. Daisy, please be a good girl and stay safe. I love you. Ben leaned back in his chair. The letters spread before him like a mosaic of stolen happiness. This was it. The entire ugly story laid bare in the innocent words of a child. Daisy wasn't just abandoned out of spite. She was removed. She was a guardian, a protector, a loyal witness who saw everything, and whoever the Shadow Man was. He had wanted her gone. Ben's exhaustion had vanished, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. This wasn't just for a dog anymore, and it was for the kind woman in the photograph and for the little girl who had used her letters as a final. Desperate cry for help. The county animal shelter was a cacophony of hope and despair. Dozens of dogs sent up a chorus of barks, yelps, and whines. Each one a plea for a walk, a treat, a second chance. The air was thick with the clean, sharp scent of disinfectant, a scent that tried but failed to mask the underlying odor of animal anxiety. In this loud, chaotic world, the golden retriever Ben had rescued was an island of profound silence. The staff had put a sign on her kennel. My name is Hope. It was a well-intentioned gesture, a testament to her survival. But to Ben, it felt wrong. The dog inside wasn't a blank slate waiting for a new name. She was a dog with a history, a dog named Daisy, and she was utterly broken. For 3 days. She hadn't moved from the far corner of her enclosure. She ate and drank only when no one was watching. A shadow retreating from the light. The shelter manager, a kind woman named Maria, shook her head sadly when Ben came for his daily visit. She's completely shut down, officer, Maria said, her voice laced with concern. It's like the world is too much for her. We can't get her to engage at all. Ben nodded, his gaze fixed on the huddled golden form. Today, he had a different idea. He pulled a small stool up to the chain-link door of the kennel and sat down, making himself small and non-threatening. He didn't coo or click his tongue. He simply sat in the shared silence for a few minutes before pulling the small bundle of letters from his jacket pocket. Okay, girl, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. He unfolded the first letter, the one with the sun drawn in the corner. He began to read Lily's innocent words aloud, his voice low and steady, a counter-rhythm to the shelter's frantic energy. Today, Grandma Eleanor let me help her plant the petunias. You tried to help too by digging a hole right in the middle of them. There was no reaction. Daisy remained a statue carved from fear. Ben took a breath and continued to the next letter, his voice weaving the simple tales of a happy life. He spoke of thrown balls, of porch swings, of shared biscuits. Still nothing. He was about to lose faith in his crazy idea when he read a specific line from the third letter. She said we were her 2 favorite rays of sunshine. I think you are the best dog in the whole world. Daisy, at the sound of her name, spoken aloud for the first time since her rescue. One of the dog's ears twitched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But it was there. Ben's heart leaped. He leaned a little closer, his voice softer still. That's you, he whispered. You're Daisy. He kept reading, his voice filled with a new sense of purpose. He read about their walks, about the garden, about the woman who loved her. He read the name Eleanor this time. The reaction was undeniable. A low, mournful whine escaped Daisy's throat, a sound so full of grief it made Ben's own chest ache. Her head lifted slowly from her paws, her amber eyes, clouded with trauma, focused on him for the first time. She wasn't just looking at a man anymore, she was listening to the echoes of her lost world, pushing herself up on trembling legs. She took one shaky step forward, then another, until her wet nose was just inches from the chain-link fence. Pointed at the source of the words, Ben met her gaze, and in the depths of her eyes, he saw it, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of the soul who had lived in that sun-drenched garden. The shelter might call her hope, but Ben knew the truth. Daisy was still in there, and she remembered everything. The connection he'd made with Daisy had lit a fire under Ben. His investigation now had a sharp, singular focus: find the Shadow Man. Back at the precinct, surrounded by the organized chaos of ringing phones and clattering keyboards, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was his world, a world of facts, data, and evidence. He would use its tools to bring justice to the world of sunshine and gardens that had been so brutally destroyed. He started with the name Daisy had responded to Eleanor. It was a long shot, but he ran a search through recent public records obituaries. Hospital admissions for elderly women named Eleanor who had recently passed away. He cross-referenced the results with pet registrations and veterinary records. After an hour of painstaking work, he found her, Eleanor Vance. An obituary published 3 weeks prior stated she had passed away peacefully at home, following a tragic fall. It mentioned she was survived by her devoted grandson, Mark Vance. Mark! The name hit Ben like a physical blow, the Shadow Man, with a name and a connection. Ben now had the keys to the kingdom. He dove into the police databases, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He ran a full background check on Mark Vance, and the digital portrait that emerged was ugly. Mark Vance was not a devoted grandson. He was a man drowning in desperation. A string of failed business ventures, maxed out credit cards from a dozen different banks, a recent eviction notice from a high-end apartment for non-payment of rent. And then the final, damning piece of the puzzle, a preliminary probate filing showing that Mark Vance was the sole heir to the entire estate of Eleanor Vance. An estate that included a fully paid-off house on a quiet, tree-lined street and a savings account with a balance that made Ben whistle softly. The motive wasn't just a possibility, it was practically screaming from the screen. Greed. Pure and simple. Eleanor, a woman who wanted to live out her days in peace with her dog, was sitting on a gold mine that could solve all of her grandson's problems. Ben printed the file. The pages warmed from the machine. He stared at Mark Vance's driver's license photo. It showed a man in his late 30s with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was an air of smug entitlement about him, a coldness in his gaze that Ben recognized instantly. This was the face of a man who could blindfold a dog and abandon it on a lonely road without a second thought. This was the face of the Shadow Man. He now had his suspect. The case had officially transformed. This was no longer just about animal cruelty. It was a suspicious death investigation. The letters from a frightened little girl had led him to a man with a powerful motive, and the reaction of a traumatized dog had confirmed his suspicions. Now he needed to build a bridge between the two. He needed to find the house where it all happened. And more importantly, he needed to find Lily. Chestnut Lane was the kind of street that appeared on postcards. Old oak trees formed a lush canopy over the pavement, dappling the manicured lawns with shifting patterns of sunlight. Houses sat nestled behind white picket fences, their gardens bursting with colorful, well-tended flowers. It was a portrait of peaceful, suburban life. But as Ben pulled up in front of number 42, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This house did not belong. While the neighboring homes were bright and cheerful, Eleanor Vance's house seemed to be holding its breath. A layer of grime dulled the windows. The once vibrant garden that Lily had described with such love in her letters was now a riot of weeds choking the life out of wilted petunias and overgrown rose bushes. The porch swing hung motionless, a lonely ghost of happier times. It was a house grieving for its owner. Ben decided to start with the neighbors, a woman with a kind. Wrinkled Face was watering a pristine bed of hydrangeas 2 houses down. He approached her, showing his badge. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Carter. I have a few questions about your former neighbor, Eleanor Vance." The woman's face softened with sadness. "Oh, Eleanor, such a tragedy. I'm Martha Gable. Is everything all right, officer? Just following up on a few things." Ben said evasively, "You knew her as well as anyone," Mrs. Gable replied, setting down her watering can. She was a lovely, quiet woman. Kept to herself mostly, but always had a wave and a smile, and she adored that dog of hers. Daisy. Goodness, those two were inseparable. You'd never see one without the other. This was the opening Ben needed. "I was told she had a fall recently," Mrs. Gable sighed, her gaze drifting to the silent house. "It was terrible after that. She was never quite the same. And her grandson, Mark. He started showing up all the time." She lowered her voice conspiratorially, and I never liked the look of him, to be honest. Always seemed to be in a rush. Always shouting into his phone. He had cold eyes, you know. Didn't seem to care much for poor Eleanor, but he sure seemed interested in her house. Her words were a perfect echo of the fears Lily had expressed in her letters. "Did you ever see a young girl visiting Mrs. Vance?" Ben asked, his pulse quickening. Mrs. Gable's expression brightened instantly. "Oh, you must mean sweet Lily. Of course she lives just down the street, at the blue house on the corner. Her mother's a nurse. Lily was like a second grandchild to Eleanor. A much better one than that Mark, if you ask me. The three of them, Eleanor, Lily, and Daisy, they were always in that garden together. The poor child was just heartbroken when Eleanor passed." Ben felt a surge of adrenaline. He had it, the final link in the chain. He knew the victim, the suspect, the witness, and now he knew where to find her. He thanked Mrs. Gable for her time and walked back toward his car, pausing to look once more at the sad, neglected house. It stood as a silent testament to the crime that had taken place within its walls. He was no longer just piecing together clues from letters. He was standing at the epicenter of the tragedy, and he knew his next conversation would be the most important one of all. The blue house on the corner had a bicycle lying on its lawn and a welcome mat that read, "Home Sweet Home." It was a picture of ordinary family life, and Ben felt the full weight of the dark subject he was about to introduce into it. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A woman in nursing scrubs answered, her expression open and friendly until she saw his uniform. A flicker of maternal concern crossed her face. "Can I help you, officer?" "Ma'am, my name is Officer Carter," he began, keeping his tone calm and respectful. "I'm here about a personal matter concerning your former neighbor, Eleanor Vance. I have reason to believe your daughter, Lily, might be able to help. I want to assure you, she is in no trouble whatsoever." The woman's posture relaxed slightly at his careful words. "Lily, what would she know?" She paused, then called back into the house. "Lily, honey, could you come here for a moment? A small girl with big, curious eyes and pigtails appeared behind her mother. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. When she saw Ben's uniform, all the color drained from her face. Her eyes widened, and her bottom lip began to tremble. She looked exactly like a child who was certain she was about to be punished for a terrible crime. Ben immediately understood. To protect her. He needed to earn her trust. He knelt, bringing himself down to her eye level, ignoring the protest from his knees. His voice was the softest he could manage. "Hello, Lily, it's okay, you're not in any trouble. I just want to talk." He decided to lead with the one truth that would bridge the gap between them. I'm the police officer who found Daisy." The effect was instantaneous. The fear in Lily's eyes was washed away by a tidal wave of urgent concern. "Daisy, is she okay? Did you find her? Where is she? Is she scared?" The questions tumbled out, each one laced with a love so fierce and pure it was breathtaking. "She's safe, I promise," Ben said, his heart aching for the little girl. "She's being very well looked after, and she's very brave, just like her best friend." He reached into his pocket and carefully took out the letter with the drawing of the sun. He held it out for her to see. "You were very brave to write these for her. Lily, you made sure someone would know her story. You gave her a voice. That was all it took." The dam of composure she had been holding back for weeks shattered. A sob escaped her lips, and she threw herself into her mother's arms, crying with a grief and relief so profound it seemed too big for her small body. Her mother shot Ben a look of dawning understanding and nodded, stroking her daughter's hair after the storm of tears had passed. Lily, clutching her mother's hand, told him everything. Her voice was small but steady. She described seeing Mark's car pull away late at night after the funeral. She told him how she'd watched from her bedroom window as he'd tied the cloth around Daisy's eyes, how Daisy had whined and tried to pull away, how Mark had shoved the confused dog into his car. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "He was so mean to her, so I packed her backpack, I put her bear in, and Grandma's picture, and my letters. I just wanted whoever found her to know that she was loved. I wanted them to know her name wasn't Stray Dog. It was Daisy." Ben listened, his respect for this small, courageous girl growing with every word. She hadn't just packed a bag, she had created a time capsule of love. A final, desperate act of faith that kindness still existed in the world. And now, her testimony was no longer just words on a page. It was a living, breathing account from the only witness to Mark's first act of cruelty after Eleanor's death. Ben could see that Lily had unburdened herself of a great weight. But her shoulders were not yet light. There was a shadow still lingering in her eyes, a secret she was still guarding. He sensed it was the final piece, the one she was most afraid to share. He kept his voice gentle. "Lily, you've been incredibly brave," he said, meaning every word. "What you did for Daisy, making sure she wasn't forgotten, that was an amazing thing to do. Is there anything else? Anything at all you remember that seems strange? Or something you saw that you think I should know?" Lily bit her lip and glanced up at her mother, who gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay. Sweetie, you can tell the officer, you can trust him." That small encouragement was all she needed. "There is something else," she whispered, her voice dropping as if the walls might hear. She told him that a few days after Eleanor's funeral, before the house was officially locked up. She had slipped into the backyard to leave one last flower on the porch swing where they used to sit. But as she approached, she heard angry noises from inside, peeking through the window. She saw him, Mark, the shadow man. He was yanking open drawers, tossing papers aside, muttering to himself. He was looking for something, terrified. Lily had hidden behind the thick rose bushes, her heart pounding. "I knew what he wanted," she said, her young face set with a grim certainty that was far beyond her years. Grandma had a book, a special one with a leather cover. She wrote in it almost every night. She called it her memory book. I think her real feelings were in there. I was scared he would find it and rip it up. So, this brave little girl had waited. After Mark had stormed out of the house in frustration and driven away, Lily had crept inside the silent home. She went straight to Eleanor's bedroom, to the nightstand where she'd seen her grandmother place the book so many times. It was still there, and she took it. "Come on," she said, her purpose clear now. She led Ben and her mother through her own tidy home and into her bedroom. It was a normal kid's room, with posters of stars and horses on the wall, from a shoebox tucked carefully under her bed, a box filled with sea glass, colorful rocks, and other childhood treasures. She lifted out her most important possession. It was a small, handsome book, bound in dark green leather that was soft with age. A small, delicate brass lock, now tarnished, held its secrets tight. She held it with both hands, presenting it to Ben not as a stolen object, but as a sacred trust. "I kept it safe," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "But I couldn't open it. The lock is real, and I couldn't find the key anywhere." Ben took the diary. It felt heavy in his hands, dense with the weight of unspoken words and hidden truths. This was the black box of the entire case? Lily's letters had told the story from the outside, a view through a window. But this contained the voice of Eleanor Vance herself. It held her fears, her pain, and possibly the accusation that could finally bring the Shadow Man out into the light. The mystery now had a physical heart. The only thing standing between him and the truth was a tiny, missing key. Ben held the locked diary, turning it over in his hands. It was a tangible secret. A voice silenced by a tiny piece of brass. A key, he mused, half to himself. People hide them in the strangest places. He looked at Lily. Did she have a favorite spot in the house? A special box? Lily shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't think so. The most special thing to Grandma wasn't a place. It was Daisy." Her words sparked an idea in Ben's mind, a long shot, but one born of the emotional, illogical nature of the case so far. The key to this mystery wasn't going to be found with a warrant or a battering ram. It would be found through love and memory. "I have an idea," he said, looking at Lily's mother. "I'd like to take Lily to see a friend." The reunion took place in a small, grassy, fenced-in yard behind the main shelter building. Ben wanted it to be quiet, away from the chaos of the kennels. When a shelter volunteer led Daisy out, she was still in her hope persona, timid, head down, tail tucked. But then she caught the scent. Her head lifted, her ears perked, and she saw her. "Daisy," Lily whispered. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The years of trauma and fear seemed to melt away in an instant, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. A happy bark erupted from the dog's throat, a sound no one at the shelter had ever heard. She bounded across the grass, a golden blur of motion, and launched herself into Lily's arms. The girl squealed with delight, falling back onto the soft lawn as the dog showered her with frantic, loving licks. It wasn't Hope, the survivor. This was Daisy, the beloved companion. Home at last in the arms of someone she loved. Ben felt a lump form in his throat as he watched. He had brought the old teddy bear with him from the evidence locker, a hunch he couldn't explain. He handed it to Lily. The girl hugged it tight with one arm while her other hand stroked Daisy's soft fur. She buried her face in the dog's neck, a tangle of pigtails and golden fur. She murmured the dog's name over and over, clutching the worn teddy bear. And then she went still. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with a flash of brilliant recollection. "The bear!" she gasped, looking at Ben with astonishment. "The key is in the bear!" Ben leaned in, his heart hammering. "What do you mean? Lily?" "I remember now, a long time ago. Grandma Eleanor showed me a secret. She said if she ever lost the key to her memory book, she had a backup. She put it somewhere Daisy would always protect. I thought she meant Daisy's collar, but we checked that. It was her toy." She pointed a trembling finger at the bear. "She made a little cut in the back and sewed it back up. She said it was our special secret. The drive back to the precinct was a blur in the sterile quiet of the evidence room, with Lily and her mother watching. Ben placed the teddy bear on a table, with the delicate precision of a surgeon. He used a small pocket knife to snip the thick, mismatched thread on a seam in the bear's back. Exactly where Lily indicated. He carefully pulled the stuffing apart, and there it was, tucked deep inside the cotton. Safe and sound, was a single, small, tarnished brass key. It was flat and old-fashioned. A perfect match for the lock on the diary. Ben picked it up, feeling its cool metal against his palm. He looked from the key to Lily's hopeful face, then to Daisy, who sat patiently at the girl's feet, her tail giving a soft thump, thump, thump against the floor. The girl's memory and the dog's love had protected the truth all along. Together, they had just given him the key to unlock it all. The air in Captain Miller's office was thick with anticipation. The small green leather diary lay open on the desk between him and Ben, its pages yellowed with age. Ben had inserted the tiny key, and the lock had sprung open with a soft, metallic click. A sound that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Now, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct, Eleanor Vance was finally ready to speak. Ben and his captain, a grizzled veteran with a no-nonsense demeanor, read through the entries together. The beginning pages were a mirror of Lily's joyful letters, a chronicle of a simple, happy life. Eleanor's handwriting was an elegant, flowing script, her words full of warmth as she wrote about her garden. Daisy's latest antics, and the delight she took in Lily's visits. It was the voice of a lucid, content woman. Then they reached the entry dated the day of her fall. The confident script wavered for the first time. A terrible accident today. I slipped on the hallway rug and have broken my hip. The doctor says it's a long recovery at my age. Mark was here. He had just waxed the floors for me. He said he was trying to be helpful, to make things nice and clean. But I don't remember that rug ever slipping before, from that day forward. The diary transformed from a book of memories into a chilling testament of fear. The entries grew shorter, the handwriting more frantic. Mark has moved into the guest room to care for me. It does not feel like care. It feels like a prison. He keeps my phone just out of reach, says I need to rest, when Mrs. Gable from next door called. He told her I was sleeping. I was not. A week later, the true conflict emerged. He brought up the will today. He knows I have left a considerable sum to the county animal rescue. My stray dogs, as he calls them, he brought papers with him. A new will leaving everything to him. He said it was simpler, better for managing the estate. I told him no. My Daisy was a rescue. Those animals deserve it. The look he gave me, it was not one of disappointment. It was pure, cold fury. The most terrifying entries, however, were about her medication. My heart feels weaker. I am breathless, just sitting up. Mark brings me my pills each night. He stands over me until I've swallowed them. I started keeping a little calendar in my nightstand, marking off the days I took them. Yesterday, I found the drawer empty. When I asked him, he just laughed and said I was a dotty old woman. That my memory was going. Ben felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He turned to the final page. The entry was dated the night before Eleanor's death. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl, as if written by a hand trembling with weakness and fear. So cold. He was here again, angrier than ever, yelling about debts. He said soon everything would be simpler. He brought the pill. It felt chalky, dissolved on my tongue before I could even swallow the water. He watched me drink every last drop. His shadow on the wall looked like a monster. I am so tired. I don't think I will wake up tomorrow, if anyone finds this. Please know it was not my time. It was not an accident. Tell my Daisy I love her more than all the sunshine in the world. Silence descended on the office. Heavy and absolute. The final words hung in the air. A whisper from the grave. It was a clear, horrifying account of systematic neglect and, very likely, murder. This was no longer a case of animal abandonment or even suspicious death. This was a homicide investigation. Captain Miller closed the diary softly. He looked at Ben, his eyes hard as flint. There was no doubt left. "Bring him in," he said. The interrogation room was small, gray, and smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was a place designed to make people feel cornered. But Mark Vance didn't look cornered. He looked bored. He sat slouched in the metal chair across from Ben, radiating an aura of entitled annoyance as if this were all a tedious bureaucratic mistake. "Look, officer, I'm a busy man," Mark began, his tone dripping with condescension. "Whatever this is about, can we speed it up? I've got a business to run." Ben let the arrogance hang in the air, studying the man who had haunted Lily's letters and Eleanor's diary. "This is about your grandmother, Mark. Eleanor Vance." Mark put on a mask of somber grief, a performance that was almost convincing. "My grandmother. What about her?" "Her passing was a terrible shock for me." "I'm sure it was," Ben said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Tell me about her dog." "Daisy?" Mark scoffed, the mask slipping. "That stupid mutt was a menace. Ran off a day or two after Eleanor passed, probably for the best. The thing was old and smelly." "That's not what our witness says," Ben pressed, leaning forward slightly. "We have a witness who saw you put the dog in your car. A dog that was blindfolded. For the first time." A flicker of genuine alarm flashed in Mark's cold eyes, but he extinguished it almost immediately. A witness. Some nosy old neighbor making up stories. "Please, I took the stray to a shelter miles away. I did the responsible thing." Ben had let him build his web of lies. Now it was time to introduce the truth. He slid the green leather diary across the steel table. The small book seemed to absorb all the light in the room. "Recognize this?" Mark's composure shattered. He stared at the diary as if it were a snake, his face a mixture of shock and rage. "Where did you get that 'that's private'?" "My grandmother was a sick, confused old woman. Those are her delusions, not evidence. She seemed very clear when she wrote this last entry," Ben said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He opened the diary to the final. Spidery script. "She wrote about you, Mark. She wrote about being afraid. She wrote that she didn't think she would wake up in the morning. He expected a denial, an outburst. Instead." Mark Vance leaned back in his chair, a slow, smug smile spreading across his face. He had been waiting for this. This was his trump card. This is really all you have. The diary of a senile woman. "That's pathetic," he sneered. "Let me save you some time. Officer, let me make this real simple for you. On the night my grandmother passed away, I was over 100 miles from here at a dinner meeting with a business associate. We were there until well after midnight. He will confirm it. My phone records will confirm it. The restaurant's security cameras will confirm it." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with triumph. "So, unless you're accusing me of being in two places at once, you have absolutely nothing. This interview is over. I'll be speaking to my lawyer about police harassment." Ben stared back, his face an unreadable mask. But inside, a cold frustration was building. Mark was right. The diary was a powerful accusation, but it was circumstantial. Against a rock-solid, verifiable alibi. It was just the word of the dead against the living. The Shadow Man had covered his tracks. He seemed untouchable. The days that followed Mark Vance's release were thick with frustration. His alibi was ironclad. His business associate had confirmed the dinner meeting, and credit card receipts and security footage placed him 100 miles away at the time of Eleanor's death. The diary was officially logged as a piece of circumstantial evidence. but Captain Miller had been blunt. "It's not enough. Ben, a good lawyer will paint her as a confused, vindictive old woman with that alibi. We can't touch him." The case was stalled, teetering on the edge of going cold. Ben couldn't accept it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eleanor's shaky handwriting, Lily's tear-streaked face, and Daisy's raw, terrified eyes behind that filthy blindfold. He found himself driving to the animal shelter after his shifts. Sitting on the floor of a quiet visiting room with the golden retriever, Daisy, who now greeted him with a soft whine and a wagging tail, would rest her head on his knee. A silent, comforting presence. It was during one of these visits, as he stroked her soft fur, that the idea sparked. It was unorthodox, a wild departure from any police procedure he'd ever learned. He thought about how Daisy wasn't just a pet. She was a guardian. She had growled at the Shadow Man. She was the one living thing Mark had been so desperate to get rid of. What if she remembered more than just a face? What if she remembered a place, a smell, a disturbance in her own territory? He presented the idea to Captain Miller, expecting to be laughed out of the office. "You want to take the dog to the crime scene as a detective?" the captain asked, rubbing his temples. "She's not just a dog. She's a witness," Ben insisted, his voice passionate. "She was there for everything. Mark got rid of her for a reason. Maybe she can show us why." Miller was silent for a long moment. He looked at the evidence board, at Mark's smug face pinned next to Eleanor's warm smile. They had nothing else. "Fine, Carter," he sighed, finally relenting. "Get your warrant, take your canine detective, but this is the last shot we get." Ben picked up Daisy from the shelter and drove to Chestnut Lane. As he pulled up, he saw Lily and her mother waiting on the sidewalk, a small, hopeful welcoming committee. Lily's face lit up when she saw Daisy's head pop up in the passenger seat, in the backyard of Eleanor's house. Ben unclipped the leash for a moment. Daisy seemed confused. She trotted cautiously through the overgrown grass, her nose twitching, taking in the familiar scents now mixed with the sad smell of neglect. She whined softly, a low, mournful sound. Ben watched, his heart sinking. Maybe this was a fool's errand. Daisy sniffed at the wilting rose bushes in the silent porch swing, then looked back at Ben as if to ask why they were in this sad, empty place. But then, something shifted. Her body went rigid. Her head snapped toward the small stone patio near the back door. She let out a single, sharp bark and began trotting with an undeniable sense of purpose. She bypassed the old, weathered flagstones and went straight to a small, square section that looked conspicuously newer than the rest. The cement holding the stones in place was a lighter, cleaner gray. Daisy stopped directly on top of it. She lowered her nose to the ground, sniffing intently at the cracks between the stones. Then, she began to dig. Her paws scratched frantically, uselessly, against the hard, unyielding surface. When that failed, she lifted her head and began to bark. It wasn't a happy bark or a frightened one. It was a deep, insistent, commanding bark, aimed directly at the ground beneath her feet. She planted her paws, refusing to move, her furious barking echoing through the quiet. Suburban street. The silent witness had found her voice, and she was screaming at Ben, telling him exactly where he needed to look. Daisy's insistent barking cut through the still afternoon air, a relentless alarm that could not be ignored. Ben didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone, his eyes never leaving the spot where the dog stood her ground. "Captain," he said. The moment Miller answered, "Get a forensics team to the Vance house. Tell them to bring a sledgehammer and crowbars. Our witness has found something. Within the hour." The quiet suburban backyard was a hub of official activity. The forensics team, initially skeptical, saw the conviction in Ben's eyes and the unyielding focus of the golden retriever, who now sat watching them, panting but refusing to leave her spot. "Right there," Ben ordered, pointing to the conspicuously new patch of stonework. "Break it up." The first blow of the sledgehammer against the flagstone cracked the silence like a thunderclap. Lily, watching from the safety of the back porch with her mother, flinched but didn't look away, with a groan of protesting cement. The heavy stone was pried loose, followed by a second and a third. Underneath was a layer of fresh, damp sand. A forensics officer began to brush it away carefully. His brush hit something hard and unyielding. It wasn't earth. It was a flat, dark surface, working together. Two officers cleared the remaining sand and dirt, revealing a thick sheet of black plastic with gloved hands. They carefully lifted the heavy, wrapped object from its shallow grave. They placed it on a clean tarp and sliced through the plastic in layers of duct tape. Inside was a small, military green, waterproof ammo box. It was heavy, its metal cool to the touch. The lead forensic officer took a crowbar to the latch and pried it open with a loud, metallic shriek. Everyone leaned in. The contents were few, but their significance was immense. On top lay a sheaf of folded legal papers. Ben carefully lifted them out. It was an official, notarized document from a local law firm, the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance. Ben's eyes scanned the pages, his heart pounding as he found the key paragraph. A significant, named portion of her estate was to be bequeathed to the very same county animal rescue where Daisy had been treated. This was the original will, the one Mark had been so desperate to make disappear, but it was the item beneath the will that made the air freeze in Ben's lungs. It was a simple, unlabeled pharmacy vial, filled with dozens of small, white pills. In a flash of horrifying clarity, Ben understood everything. The diary had told only half the story. Mark's plan was more insidious than simple neglect. Withholding medication was risky. Eleanor might have realized and called for help. Instead, he had played a crueler game. He had swapped her actual, life-sustaining heart medication with these placebos, most likely making her weaker and more confused by the day. He had been slowly killing her for weeks, and the vial she was supposed to be emptying was instead being hidden here. A perfect record of his crime. Her death wasn't caused by a single act on a night he had a perfect alibi for. It was a methodical, drawn-out murder. Ben picked up the vial, the small pills rattling within. This was it. The cold, hard, physical proof. Mark's alibi for the night of her death was now meaningless. This box proved he had been actively, systematically causing her death all along. The Shadow Man's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The hours following the discovery in Eleanor's garden were the most agonizing of Ben Carter's career. He paced the sterile hallway outside the forensics lab. The image of the buried ammo box seared into his mind. It was one thing to have a gut feeling, a theory built on a child's letters and a dog's instinct. It was another entirely to have cold, hard proof. Now, all that stood between suspicion and certainty was a chemical analysis, the vial of white pills. So innocuous to the naked eye. Held the final, damning secret. His phone buzzed, and he snatched it up. It was the lead technician from the lab. "Officer Carter," the voice said, professional and clipped. "We have a positive ID on those pills. They're lisinopril, 10 milligram. We cross-referenced the unique identifiers on the pills with the pharmacy's records for Eleanor Vance. It's a perfect match for the heart medication she was prescribed, the one she was supposed to be taking 3 times a day for the last 2 months of her life." Ben closed his eyes, a wave of grim validation washing over him. And the tox screen from the autopsy? As we saw before. Minimal traces of lisinopril in her system. So, for weeks, she barely took any. But we found something else this time. running a more specific panel. A massive, fatal dose of digoxin. It's another heart drug. But in a person with her condition, in that quantity, it would induce cardiac arrest within hours. It wouldn't look like poison on a standard screen. It would just look like her weak heart finally gave out. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Mark had been slowly weakening her for weeks by swapping her real pills with placebos, making her decline seem natural. Then, on the night he had his airtight alibi, he had administered the final, untraceable blow, disguised as another act of care. He had buried the evidence of the swap, the vial of her real medication, thinking it was the perfect crime, armed with this certainty. Their first target wasn't Mark. It was his alibi, his business associate. A man named Gerald Finney was brought in for questioning regarding a financial matter. Gerald entered the room with the easy confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Just another witness helping the police with their inquiries. Ben and Captain Miller let him tell his story again. All about the long dinner meeting, the discussion of projections, the late-night handshake deal. He was a smooth, practiced liar. When he was finished, Ben didn't present the diary. He slid the evidence bag containing the muddy ammo box onto the table. "Ever see this before, Mr. Finney?" Gerald's composure faltered. "No, what is it?" "It was buried in Eleanor Vance's backyard," Captain Miller said, his voice like gravel. "Inside. We found her original will, the one Mark didn't want anyone to see. And this," he placed a second evidence bag next to the box. This one containing the vial of pills. Her actual heart medication. The pills she was supposed to be taking, but wasn't. Miller leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Your friend Mark wasn't just neglecting her. He was methodically killing her. And that alibi you provided that doesn't just make you a liar. In the eyes of the law, providing a false alibi in a homicide makes you an accessory. We're looking at 25 years to life. Mr. Finney, I suggest you start thinking very carefully about whose future you're more interested in protecting your own. Or that of a man who murdered his own grandmother for money." Panic flooded Gerald's face. The cocky facade crumbled into dust. He looked from the vial to the captain's unforgiving eyes. His loyalty to Mark, bought for a mere $5,000, evaporated. "He called me." Gerald stammered, his voice cracking. "That night, he was frantic. He said the old woman was finally gone, that he'd be coming into his money. He told me he'd pay me to say we were at dinner all evening. I have debts. I didn't know. I didn't know he'd killed her. I swear." He buried his face in his hands, his confession tumbling out between sobs, a pathetic, self-serving cascade of truth. The final act took place in the same interrogation room where Mark had been so smugly triumphant. He was brought in again, his lawyer at his side. Furious about the harassment, he still believed he was insulated by his alibi, that the diary was meaningless. Ben said nothing. He simply began to arrange items on the steel table. First, the green leather diary, opened to the last page. Second, the photo of the ammo box lying in its shallow grave. Third, the vial of pills. And finally, an iPad, on which he played the crystal clear. Videotaped confession of Gerald Finney. Mark watched the video, his face transforming from a mask of indignation to one of disbelief, then to sheer, primal terror. His alibi, his shield, his one perfect defense, was gone. "It's over." "Mark," Ben said quietly when the video ended, "we know you swapped the pills. We know you administered a fatal dose. We know you paid Gerald to lie for you. And we know why you had to get rid of the one witness who loved her enough to be a threat." Ben slid one last photo across the table. It was the picture he'd taken of Daisy, her intelligent eyes seeming to stare right through Mark. A silent, furry embodiment of justice. "You abandoned her. You blindfolded her and left her to die because you were afraid she'd lead someone back to the house. Back to your secret in the garden. You saw her as a loose end. But what you failed to understand is that she wasn't just a dog. She was a guardian. She was Eleanor's memory. And she remembered everything you did. That was what finally broke him. Not the evidence. Not the threat of prison. But the image of the loyal animal he had discarded. The sheer, infuriating fact that his downfall came not from a clever detective or a forensics lab, but from the unwavering love of a dog. He lunged forward, a guttural roar of fury and despair tearing from his throat. Sweeping the evidence from the table, it was the tantrum of a thwarted child, a pathetic, ugly breakdown. And in that raw, unfiltered rage, the confession came not a neat admission of guilt, but a spew of venomous self-pity. He blamed his grandmother for being stubborn, blamed his debts, blamed the world for his failures. And yes, he admitted it all: the pills, the lies, the blindfold, the shallow grave, as two uniformed officers came in to lead him away. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind the empty, shrunken husk of a man. The shadow man was just a greedy, pathetic coward after all. Ben stood, emotionally exhausted but filled with a profound sense of rightness. He walked out into the main precinct, the noise and activity of the room feeling distant. He pulled out his phone and made the one call that mattered most. Lily's mother answered on the second ring. "Hello, it's Officer Carter," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked out the window at the city lights beginning to flicker on against the evening sky. "It's over. We got him. Tell Lily that Eleanor can rest now." The interrogation room was the same, but the man sitting in the metal chair was not. The smug arrogance had evaporated from Mark Vance, replaced by the pallid, clammy sheen of trapped desperation. Between him and Ben, on the cold steel table, lay the contents of the ammo box. The original wilt, the vial of small, white pills. "The lab results came back an hour ago," Ben said, his voice low and steady, each word a hammer blow to Mark's crumbling facade. "The pills in the vial are lisinopril, a common heart medication, the exact prescription your grandmother was supposed to be taking 3 times a day. We can trace the lot numbers right back to her pharmacy." Mark stared at the vial, his mouth opening and closing silently. No sound coming out. "Funny thing is," Ben continued, leaning forward, "the toxicology report from your grandmother's autopsy showed almost no trace of lisinopril in her system. What it did show was a fatal concentration of something else. Something that, when mixed with her condition, would be lethal. Something you must have given her that final night. On your way to your so-called business dinner, the final piece had fallen into place when they confronted Mark's business associate. Faced with conspiracy to commit fraud and potential accessory to murder charges, the man had folded instantly. The alibi was a sham. Mark had paid him $5,000 to lie. He had only shown up at the restaurant just before midnight, frantic and sweating, long after his grandmother had drawn her last breath. Ben pushed a photograph across the table. It was a picture of Daisy, taken just yesterday, sitting in the sun. Her head cocked, her eyes bright and intelligent. "You thought you'd gotten rid of the only witness," Ben said softly. "You were wrong. You underestimated her love for Eleanor. You buried the evidence of your crime, but you couldn't bury her memory of where you did it. She never forgot. She led us right to it. At the sight of the dog." Something in Mark finally snapped. It wasn't a confession born of remorse, but a guttural scream of pure, pathetic rage. Rage at a dog, at a little girl, at a dead old woman who had refused to bend to his will. It was the shriek of a monster finally dragged out of the shadows and into the light. 6 months later. The world had moved on. The trial had been swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the diary, the original will, the vial of pills, the broken alibi, and the damning testimony of a brave little girl, Mark Vance was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, calling his actions a chilling portrait of greed and cruelty, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The story of the canine witness had been a brief media sensation, but like all stories, it eventually faded, leaving behind only the quiet truth of what happened. For Ben Carter, the truth had reshaped his life. His small, sterile apartment was no longer just a place to crash between shifts. It was a home. A pair of water bowls sat by the kitchen counter, a well-chewed teddy bear, the original, carefully stitched back up, lay on a dog bed in the corner, and every morning began not with the jarring buzz of an alarm clock, but with the soft, wet nudge of a golden retriever's nose. He and Daisy had a routine, a long walk through the park at dawn, where Daisy would chase squirrels with the joyful abandon of a dog who had forgotten what it was to be afraid. Then Ben would go to work, his heart lighter, his step more purposeful than it had been in years. The weary cynicism that had clouded his worldview had lifted, replaced by a profound understanding that his job wasn't just about punishing the bad, but about protecting the good. Lily was a permanent fixture in their new life, every Tuesday and Thursday after school. Her mother would drop her off at Ben's apartment. She would do her homework at his kitchen table. Her brow furrowed in concentration, while Daisy slept soundly at her feet. She had appointed herself Daisy's official storyteller, reading chapters from adventure books aloud, her voice clear and confident. The timid, haunted girl was gone. In her place was a bright, resilient child who had faced down a monster and won. Together, the three of them, the cop who had found his heart, the girl who had spoken the truth, and the dog who had remembered it, had forged an unlikely but unbreakable family. Eleanor's house on Chestnut Lane was sold, as per her final, true wishes. The proceeds were split. A portion went into a trust for Lily's education, a final gift from the grandmother she had adopted in her heart. The rest, a very significant sum, was donated to the county animal rescue. One crisp, sunny Saturday, Ben, Lily, and Daisy stood in a small crowd at the shelter. They were dedicating a new, state-of-the-art veterinary wing. A small brass plaque was unveiled by the entrance. It read, "The Eleanor Vance and Daisy Wing in honor of a woman whose love knew no bounds, and the loyal friend who proved that love never forgets." Ben watched as Lily reached out and gently touched Daisy's name on the plaque. A proud, happy smile on her face. He looked at the shelter, at the lives that would be saved here, at the second chances that would be given, all because of one kind woman and her unwavering devotion to a stray she had once saved. Justice wasn't just the punishment of the wicked, it was the flourishing of the good they had tried to destroy. Later that afternoon, they sat together on a bench in the park, sharing a pretzel as the sun cast long golden rays through the trees. Daisy lay on the grass, her head on Ben's foot, letting out a soft sigh of pure contentment. Ben watched Lily laugh as a butterfly fluttered past her nose, and he felt a sense of peace so profound it almost overwhelmed him. He had started this journey on a lonely road at dusk, finding a victim of the worst of humanity. He had ended it here, in the brilliant afternoon sun, surrounded by the very best of it. Love, he realized, was the one clue that could solve any mystery, and the one piece of evidence that could never, ever be buried.